Okay, hello again, Josh. This is since you liked my video I made last night drinking a Bud Light, this is my follow-up video I made this morning for you, helping you understand state, since you sent me a DM saying you would like to see a follow-up video. So this is me creating it this morning. Woo! As you can see, it's nothing more than what I had last night, except now I'm on my MacBook in the Covalence co-working office. And I forgot to upload the code I had last night to GitHub. I forgot to push it, so I had to create a quick new React app. And as you can see, it's nothing fancy. All it is just a couple cards. It's a container fluid. It's built using Create React app just on my MacBook now instead of my PC. Index HTML has nothing special to it. Again, it's just the Bootstrap stuff, div ID root. And, I decided to keep it more traditional today and not call it Bud Light like last night. Nothing in that index HTML that's special. The index.js is nothing more than what you saw yesterday. Simple. Our current app is just a container fluid with a margin of 5. It has a row, and each one of these cards counts as a column. And all that column is a card that has some margin on it that has a body. That's literally all it is. Very simple. So let's talk about state. We saw yesterday how props are values you can pass down into children components from a parent component. State can also be passed as a prop, just so you're aware, but state is typically something locally managed by that component. It's its local state, and state is only accessible in a class-based component. And again, it's what triggers re-renders and helps you make and bring to life your web apps using React. So in order to upgrade this guy into a class component, we're going to have to import the component class from React, which you can do as such. Component, and so it's no longer just a function anymore. It becomes a class. So this is going to change to class. Still has the name card. This will no longer be a function, but instead it's going to say extends component. Cool. And every component has one major requirement, and that it has a render method, and that render method returns some JSX. We have now successfully built a React class-based component. There we go. And so if we come back to our code, everything is still working just fine. We haven't broken anything. It hasn't changed anything either. And with an app this small, like the efficiency between a functional component loading quickly versus a class component is pretty much non-existent. And you really won't notice a difference between class and functional components until you get to really, really large projects. But yeah. This thing, like Morgan pointed out yesterday, under the hood is being built with a constructor, even though you don't declare one here. But every time you want state, you upgrade to a class component, and you're probably going to do this every single time until you learn otherwise. You always say constructor with props, super up some props, and this is where you have access to state. And state is an object. And that's it. We now have access to state. And we can call the state key anything we want. We can give it whatever properties of whatever values. And then this is going to be the default state for the application. So let's say we're going to have some kind of message, and that message will be a string. So right now, our default state is an empty string, right? Nothing super complicated here. As a matter of fact, if you don't have this already, find the class. I have an error. Oh, look, I copied Bootstrap in, and I forgot to change it to class name. Go figure. And that error will now go away. There we are. If you actually download the React DevTools Google Chrome extension, this is actually quite useful for figuring out your components and where state's being held. So you see this card component? Because I upgraded it to a class component with a state object, it recognizes that state now exists here, right? So that's something cool with the React DevTools. You can actually pick out your components and watch where state or props are being passed down and where something might be being messed up and not flowing correctly from parent to child. So it's a great way of testing your React code. So how do we actually do something with state? Well, whenever state is changed, it triggers a re-render. And that's where the fun is with React state. And you never change state directly. There's this term called that state is immutable, meaning you don't change it. You just create new copies of it. So instead of overriding the blank message state we currently have, what we do is we grab an instance of the blank state, then add whatever text we want into it. So we preserve the initial one, but create a new one that's going to be our new state that re-renders into the screen for us. So let's see this in just the simplest possible action I can think of. We're going to put this into some text and say this.state.message. Right? Oh, my goodness. There we go. Right? So we broke out of JSX with our curly braces, and we're saying whatever the value of this .state.message is, print it inside this card body, which right now it's blank. So that's it. It lines up. We have a bunch of blank cards. So now, what if we do this? What if our message said, hello, Josh? Come back to our code. And what do you know? They all say, hello, Josh. Well, okay, but what's the point of state if you have to come in and hard code an initial state, right? Like, how is that going to help us? Well, you could pass down a prop and set some local state that causes these things to trigger a render, or better yet, the most simple example I can think of, and let's go back to blank. Let's put in an input. This is really something really simple in HTML that has a bit more complicated in React code, unfortunately. So this input is a self-closing tag in React, and this will throw you for a lot of problems if you're copying stuff from Bootstrap. Like if you copy a whole form from Bootstrap, it'll have several inputs. And those inputs typically look like this when you copy them from, what's it called? From the Bootstrap documentation. And you'll see a bunch of red underlines, and typically, it tells us what the error is, which says expected corresponding JSX closing tag for input. So you have to self-close input tags like that in order to get them to properly work in React. Just a weird little syntax thing for React to keep in mind when you're pasting Bootstrap stuff in or you're building your own components with inputs like a form or something like that. And as of right now, everything will have an input here, and we're typing, but it's not actually registering anything on the React side of things. Clicking on these cards here, state's not actually being updated or anything like that, so there's nothing magical happening. We're just typing it. So if we wanted to get this reference and send it off to a database, or like we're doing like some kind of login form, we don't know how to target the underlying DOM with React code, right? We don't know what this reference is and what its value is. We can't use DOM to get that reference anymore, so we have to use a React way of getting it. So we have to tie this input to some kind of dynamic state, which we have up here. So check this out. The value is in HTML attribute you're already familiar with, and the value is now going to be this .state.message. Boom. Rerun, like, cool, there we go. And now, if you hear me typing stuff, nothing's happening because I don't have a handler that handles changing the value of these states. They're all wired up to this blank message, and I cannot change it by typing. So if I'm going to do hello again, and they all update in those input values, booyah. But again, I can't type. I can't change the underlying state. So how do we handle that in React? Well, inputs come with something called, I'm actually going to break these into new lines like this. So again, nothing different. I just move these things to a new line to make them easier to read for us. Along with the value attribute, something new is in inputs in React, and that's called an onChange handler. And this is an event that says, hey, anytime a change happens in this input field, do some function. So your easiest way to do this is like this. You'll have, obviously, a function like this, and it will call some kind of helper function like this.handle input change or something like that. You can call this whatever you want. I'm just calling it that as that's the most common thing you're going to see. So now we have to write our class helper method here. And as you can imagine, when you're typing, that fires an event, and we have to get that event's target value. So this function that fires an onChange will be an event. We're going to pass that event into handle input change. This will receive some kind of event. So I'm just, you're probably familiar with this from the jQuery side of things, hopefully. And now we can do this. Actually, before I get there, what you don't want to do actually is you don't want to say something like this. This.state.message is going to be equal to e.target.value. You don't want to do that because this is what I was talking about earlier. This is overriding initial state, and you need to keep it immutable. You need to create a new instance of it, right? And you want to trigger a re-render. So as you can see, this is not actually updating any of these guys at all. And there's a console alert. It says, do not mutate stack directly. Use set state. See, so that's what I was talking about. You don't want to directly change state, which is why this doesn't work. In order to cause a re-render, so like what happens is every time you change state the correct way, the React component class recognizes a state change. When it recognizes a state change, it triggers this render function to fire again, which returns the new JSX with the new state. And so React class components have a function built into them that you've inherited called setState. So check this out. This.setState, there it is right there. It is a React component method that we have inherited and can use. And it's a function. And the function accepts an object as its sole argument, which you learn other ways to do it later, but this is like your simplest possible way. And the sole argument it accepts is a new state object. So what this is doing for us is a function that stores the initial state, appends the new state, and then uses that as the local state. It's a lot going on, but if we demo this together, maybe you'll see what I'm saying. So what you're doing with the set state is saying, hey, the local state of message, overwrite that with the new e.target.value. Cool. And that's literally all we have to do. This set state, every single time we type a letter, say the first letter I type is an H, it'll fire that event, recognize this H, set state of message, not overwrite this. It'll set this aside, and then it will have a new message that says H. When the set state fires, it triggers a re-render, and this .state.message value should have an H inside of the input field finally. So, with all that being said, let's test this out. H. Haha. Crazy. We can now actually just type into these inputs, and look at that. Interesting. Remember earlier, all four were changing every single time I was changing state directly when I was saying hello Josh inside of this message right here, right? But now each one is managing its own state locally. They're all different. So what else can we do that's cool with state? I've just wired up an input. You could do that easy in HTML. What makes this so cool and special? That's a good question, my friend. So how about we do this? Let's have a paragraph tag on every single card, and that paragraph tag will also have the value of this .state.message. Yeah, there we go. Cool. So now, ready for the magic? Hello? There. Josh. Bunch of exclamation points. Look at that. Every single time we type, it causes a re-render only in this card component and not every card component. So each of these card components is handling its own local state. That's pretty dope. That's pretty cool, man. Hello, man. Yeah, so like this p tag right here is managed by a state. And so when we type here, it triggers a set state, which triggers a re-render, and it updates with our new state value, which is just a string of characters, right? That's all it is. And so now we are successfully doing something cool with state, and it's dynamic. So each one of these things manages its own local state, right? They're not all tied together, even though we've coded one component and we're using it 4 times in our application. And again, I mean, that just holds true if we paste 5 more of these in here, right? That was what I showed you last night that was really cool about it. It's going to refresh everything, and because I changed my JSX code, it has to recompile it into JavaScript, which causes everything to go back to blank again. So this is essentially refreshing a page, and remember, their initial state is a blank message. And there we go. Each one manages its own state. And at its simplest, that's how you're going to wire up a lot of forms in React. So as you can imagine, if you had a huge form with 10 different inputs, you're probably going to have to, you will learn how to do other ways, you'll learn other ways to handle it. But for now, you'll have to have another key of like message 2 or something like that. You'll have to have another input change handler, handle input change 2. It's actually going to be the exact same thing we have above. So there we go. There we go. Message 2 is the second key we're now messing with and no longer the first one. I'm going to copy this first input. I'm going to put one below it, auto format, and the value will be this message 2, and this will be handle input change 2. Cool. And then we'll have another paragraph tag below it of this .state.message 2. There we go. Cool. Now let's see what happens. Aha, very, very interesting. So as you can see, the forms can get kind of cumbersome in React, but once you get in the flow of things, they're really not that bad, especially just copying and pasting this stuff over and over again. But that's a really cool and simple example of how to use state. And we actually don't have to do this. What if I wanted a component that shows this stuff right here? So let's create that. We're going to make a new file. We're going to call it card_state_displayer.jsx. And again, this is my favorite thing to do always with React components, is keep them insanely simple to make sure I have wired them up correctly. Card state displayer is a function. It will take props because that's how I'm going to do this. It's going to return some amount of JSX, which is what makes it a React component. Hi there. Export default, card state displayer, booyakasha, good to go. The card, I'm going to delete that second input. I don't really care to mess with 2 again. Delete that guy, clean it up a little bit. Go back to my single state and my single input. Except now I'm going to do card state displayer, and create React app will help automatically fill in these imports for you. So I typed in the name of the component I wanted and hit enter, and it automatically found it and linked it for me. This is actually a cool feature built into Create React app that will not be in other projects out there unless they also implement this plugin. So it's something that's really cool about Create React app that does that automatically for you. So let's go test this. Okay, they all successfully say hi there. So I know I've made the component correctly. So now let's actually do what I wanted it to do, which is going to be a p tag that's going to say props dot, parent state dot message or something like that. And so remember, everything is passed to props, and I have to make sure the prop has, hold on, I messed that up. There we go, dot parent state. That should all be we need to, that should be all we need to have. So we have the object props, which will have a parent state on it, which will be a value from above. So coming back here, everything's blank again, as we expect, because we're not passing anything down yet into this guy. So remember, I called it parent state on the bottom end. So in the card state displayer component, it's expecting a prop called parent state. So I'm going to make sure it lines up. Parent state is going to be the value of whatever this dot state dot message is. Cool. And so now, as I'm typing this on change handler fire, it will set a new state. This will get updated, right? But not overridden. And this input's value will dynamically start typing with me. And when the state changes and it triggers a re-render, it will pass a new state down to this component, which all it does is takes a prop and displays it. So as I'm typing now in a parent component state, a child should also be reflecting it, which again just goes to show how you can pass state down. Cool, right? Very cool. So hopefully this quick little demo gives you an idea of state and how it's locally managed across your components, and how it provides some cool functionality for your web applications. If you have any further questions, as always, feel free to reach out to me, and if you need anything else, just give me a shout. I'll be happy to make any of the videos you want on React stuff. Happy hacking.